After Yantiv. Today's daf is Be'ezra Hashem, daf Chof Aleph, number 21. And we're going to start from daf Chof Amid Beis, right by the Bailahu, about I would say like 11 lines from the bottom. Just what we're discussing is just simple ideas. You can see in the picture over here, we're discussing the kior. The kior was that vessel in the Beis Hamikdash, just right outside the sanctuary, in front of the Mizbeach, where the Kahanim would wash their hands and feet. Okay, it's called Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim. They would open up the spigot and water would come out of it, and they would wash their hands and feet. So the Gemara first discusses a question. Ibayalahu. Let us ask a question over here. Here we go. Tuma Mahu Shetoyel L'Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim. If the hands of the kohen became tummy, how did his hands become tummy? Let's say you touch a Sefer Torah. Midrabanan, if you touch the Sefer Torah with your bare hands, your hands become tummy. So does that ruin your Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim? Does the kohen have to repeat Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim? So the Gemara says, Intim Solayma Yitzia Loy Pasla. If, yes, that start is right. If you want to say that going out of the Beis Hamikdash will not ruin your Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim, let's say a kohen, walked off the Beis Hamikdash. He doesn't have to repeat Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim. So why? Over there, the Gavri Chazit, because the kohen didn't do anything wrong. He is just ready to walk back into the Beis Hamikdash, so it doesn't ruin anything. But over here, if your hands become tamei, the gavra loy chaze, the person now has tamei hands. In order to retire the hands, you have to dip them into a mikveh. You dip your hands into the mikveh. So therefore, asuche masach daite. He's not thinking about his hands because he knows he has to stick his hand into a mikveh, and therefore his hands will become dirty. So therefore, he'll have to do kiddush yadayim v'raglayim. Repeat that as well. So he'll dip his hands into the water and then do Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim. Or maybe, keeping the Hadar Chazik, since it's so easy to dip your hands back into a mikvah, he's not gonna forget about his hands, he's not gonna let it become dirty. Therefore, he does not have to repeat the Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim. So the question is, if his hands became Tameh, does he have to repeat the Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim? So if the kohen's hands became tummy, so the Kashma come in here. Kiddush Yadav V'Ragel V'Nitmu. If he did Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim, the kohen did Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim, and then his hands became tummy. Matbilim, you stick your hands into the mikvah. The Ein Tzarich LeKaddish, you don't have to do Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim. By the way, Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim, as we saw, is a very difficult process because you really have to wash your hands and feet at the same time. You stick your hand and feet right under the spigot, and so you have to be sort of flexible of your right foot, and then you do it with your left foot. So if your hands became tamei, don't worry, stick your hands in the mikvah, and you don't have to mikadosh your hands again. So the Gemara says you're right. So that resolves the question. My question was never about if just your hands became tamei. If just your hands became tamei, you don't have to do Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim again. Kikam abaylam nitmu kol gufay. If your entire body became tummy, so if your entire body became tummy, there you're not going to just stick your hands into the mikvah. You're going to have to stick your whole body into the mikvah. Let's say you touch the sharets. So if you touch the sharets, so you become tummy for that day. So maybe you go to the mikvah and you don't have to repeat Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim. So the Gemara says, wait a second. Let's say you became tamei at 9:00 in the morning. So you can't even do the avodah until the evening, until the sunset, because even if you go to the mikvah when you become tamei, you have to wait until sunset. So kol gufay typically kivin demoya leme'evet harav shamish asuche masach daite. When a person goes to the mikvah, he still has to have sunset pass over him, and therefore he's not going to wash his hands. His hands will become dirty again. So certainly he would have to do Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim. Because even if you went to the mikveh at 9:00 in the morning, you still can't do the avodah for another 10 hours. And therefore, you're not going to wash your hands. You're not going to watch your hands. So therefore, you'll have to repeat the Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim. Answers the Gemara, my question is, going the itma samach l'shiyas kama. Right before sunset, let's say right before 6 o'clock in the evening, like 2 minutes before 6, he became tamei. And then he went to the mikveh. So he wasn't really much time without being tahar because he became, as soon as he goes to the mikveh and 2 minutes later sunset, he's a tahar person. So the question is, does he have to repeat Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim? So Tashma, come in here. I'll bring it a proof from the Paraduma. They made the Paraduma on Mount Olives. They didn't slaughter the Paraduma to create that Paraduma ashes. They slaughtered the red cow on Mount Olives. So, but you needed a kohen to do it, right? And kohen had to slaughter the Paraduma and do all the service. So to make the ashes. So Para, the cow. So Rabbi Chiya Rabbi Yosef Amar, what did you do? How did the kohen prepare himself? Mekadosh b'kli sharis b'fnei v'yotzei. First, he did the Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim in the Beis Hamikdash, and then went to Mount Olives. But here's the case: Rabbi Yochanan Amar Rabbi Yosef says he doesn't have to do Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim in the Beis Hamikdash. Afilu b'chutz, even on Mount Olives. Afilu b'kli kol, even if he used a non-Beis Hamikdash vessel. Afilu b'mikedash acheres, even if it was made out of cheap earthenware. Not like the copper that you see in the picture over here, but it was made out of cheap earthenware, wasn't a holy vessel. That's good enough. Now, the truth is, what did you gain by Paraduma doing Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim? We're on Chaf Aleph and Aleph. For Para, when you made the Paraduma, there was a funny thing. The Tamuyim Ataminimile, they actually made the Kohen become Tameh. They actually were Matama the Kohen with a sheretz, let's say. Or they made him Toma, right? Because the Tanan, we learned, and then we asked him, we told the Kohen, go to the mikvah right after you became Tameh. Maybe there was a mikvah on Har HaZeisim, and then he burnt the Paraduma. Because, why did they do such a strange thing? He was Tahar. The Tanan, we learned in the Mishnah, Metamen Hoya Kohen HaSoyef Esapara. They used to make the Kohen who was processing the paraduma, they made him tamei. Umatbil nois, and they made him go to the mikveh. Now, why did they do such a thing? Lahitzi milibid shel tzedukim, because the non-believers of the chachamim would say, they would say, but the Chumash says that the kohen has to be totally pure. And we know, Pi Kabbalah's Chazal, that you didn't have to be totally pure. You just had to go to the mikveh, but you didn't have to have the sunset pass over you. But Meruve Shemesh, even a kohen who did not have sunset pass over them, they could do the paraduma. But Tzedukim says no, you have to have sunset pass over you in order for you to do the paraduma. So we dafka made the kohen in a situation that he's tar prior to sunset to do the paraduma, and therefore he did the paraduma. But we didn't ask him to repeat Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim. So we see from there that Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim, if the kohen became tamei, even if we meant to the mikvah, he does not have to repeat the Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim. So there's your proof. Answers the Gemara. Shamina, from here you can see, Loi Pasla Tuma. The Tuma did not invalidate his Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim. Answers the Gemara, no. Shani para, you're bringing a proof from a paraduma. Hoyel the tvul yoim loy pasbe. The whole paraduma is not like a korban, because it can be done with a tvul yoim. Unlike a regular service in the Beis Hamikdash, you can't be a tvul yoim. Somebody who's tamei and didn't go to and went to the mikveh and didn't have sunset, that wouldn't work on a regular korban. So that's why in the Beis Hamikdash, if you're a tvul yoim, you would have to repeat the Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim. Whereas by the paraduma, you did not have to, because the paraduma was not really like a korban. It was done on Har HaZeisim, and it was processed with a kohen that just became tamei and then went to the mikvah. So therefore, he didn't have to repeat this Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim. So the Gemara says, if it's not even a korban, ihachi lamelei lemekadosh. Why did you do Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim to do the paraduma? Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim is only reserved for karbonos that are done in the Beis Hamikdash, not for something that's done on Har Zaysim. And says the Gemara, Ke'ein Avodah Be'inim. We wanted it to look like a holy service, so we required to do some sort of Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim on Har Zaysim. But really, I'm not even sure if it's a real din of Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim. It really isn't, because it can be done with a non-holy vessel. But it looked like you're preparing it like a Kedusha, a carbon on Har Zaysim, and therefore it's not really Kiddush Yadayim. So basically, we left our question unresolved. What's the question? If a kohen became Tameh 2 minutes before sunset, and then went to the mikvah, now sunset passed, so he's a tar, does he have to repeat Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim because he never lost focus of his hands? He didn't allow his hands to become dirty. So therefore, the Gemara leaves that unresolved. New question. Ibaylahu, the question was, Ma'al Kaddish Yodav Ragla Bakir. What happens if you open up, here's a picture of the kiyar, you open up the top of the kiyar, and you stick your hands into the kiyar. So do you have to, is that good enough? You stick your hands and feet into the kiyar. Mimenu Amar Achman, the Torah says, take the water from the kiyar, so therefore from the basin. So, but you can't, Amar Rahman, that's what the Torah says. Don't stick your hands in there. Dilma, does the Torah mean afilu b'soichai? You could even stick your hands in the kiyar, and that's good enough for Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim. Amar Rav Nachman b'Yitzchak, Tashma, come in here. The Brisa says, Oi, if a kohen should tavo b'mei mora, v'avad avaydasei psula. If the kohen just went to the mikveh, he went to cave water, and did the avodah, it's possible because he didn't do a normal Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim. You have to do or wash your hands and feet from that kiyar. Now, why did the Brisa said he went to a cave water mikveh? Because he went inside. Mei kiyar, if he put his hands in water his hands and feet into the kiyar, dumya demei ma'ara va'avad, and he did it like you would go into a mikveh. He, instead of going into a mikveh, he went into the basin himself and then stuck his hands, opened the top and stuck his hands in and feet in. His service would be kosher. So that should resolve your question. Adds to the Gemara, loy, it doesn't resolve it. Really, if you stick your hands into the kiyar, that's not a good Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim. But I don't have to tell you that. That for sure doesn't work. But Meimore Itzruchalei, I have to tell you that if you go into a mikvah, and which is mikvah water, I would think that it works. It becomes like a Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim. Because shaloi time kol gufay table behem, since your whole body becomes tor by going into a mikvah, yodav v'ragav lekoshkem, so that your hands and feet should also become tar. So therefore, no, Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim is very different. You see, it's not about becoming tahar, because by just washing your hands and feet, it doesn't become tar. Somehow it adds a holiness to you. So the Gemara seems to bend towards this situation that it has to be done as you see in the picture, where you open the basin, they open the faucet, and the water falls on their hands and feet at the same time. But it's not like they can open the top and just stick their hands and feet into it. Now the Gemara says another story. The Gemara is talking about, let's go to here. In the picture, the problem with the water in the kiyar is that it becomes puzzle if you leave it overnight. Like anything that is exposed overnight becomes invalid. So they had to solve the problem of the kiyar water of not becoming puzzle by being exposed overnight. So what they did was, as you can see in the picture, they invented a pulley system where they put the kiyar into water overnight that was in the ground of the Beis Hamikdash. So it's like part of the Beis Hamikdash. So it was not invalidated by lina, by being exposed overnight. Because again, once it would be left alone overnight, the water inside the kiyar would become invalid. So they created this pulley system, that put the kiyar into the water overnight. So now the Gemara says, when does that water become possible? When does the water inside the kiyar become possible? Reb Chia bar Yosef says, May kiyar difsalin, May kiyar will become invalid, the water in the kiyar, lematirim kamatirim. It would be invalid at sunset. It would become invalid if you're trying to use the May kiyar water to do Kiddush Yadayim V'Ragalayim, to do a service like sprinkle the blood or do Kmitza, because those types of services are done during the day. So therefore, Kiddush Yadayim V'Ragalayim have to be done during the day. If after sunset you want to do Kiddush Yadayim V'Ragalayim, it's going to be invalid, that Kiddush Yadayim V'Ragalayim. Assuming that all you do is Kiddush Yadayim V'Ragalayim and then wait till the next morning, still, if you did it after sunset, it's invalid. Le'evarim ke'evarim. But if you're doing a service that can be performed at night, and yes, there were services that were done in the Beis Hamikdash at night, which is putting the limbs of the karbanos onto the bonfire on the mizbeach. There, you can do Kiddush Yadayim V'Ragalayim after sunset, and it would become possible. This type of water would become possible. The water in the kiyah would, for that type of service, would become possible by dawn, early morning, by Alosa Shachar. So there are two time periods, according to Reb Chia bar Yosef, where a Meikir would become possible: by sunset and by Alosa Shachar, depending on the service you're trying to do. Rav Chizda says there's one time. Only by Alosa Shachar. So, in other words, they didn't have to, according to Ke'everim, according to Rav Chizda, they didn't have to right away by sunset dump this kiyar back into the water over here. The water in the kiyar is still valid up until Amoid HaShachar, until dawn. Rabbi Yochanan makes a cryptic statement, and we don't understand what he's trying to say. The kiyar, kevin sheshikoi shuv ein maleo. Seems to say, Rabbi Yochanan said, that, let's say by sunset, they already dumped the kiyar, they lowered the kiyar into the water. Ein maleo, don't bring it up. So it comes to see that by sunset, they brought it down, and no matter what, they don't bring it up till tomorrow morning, because the water inside would become invalid overnight. So according to Rabbi Yochanan, it would seem to say that there's one time that the water becomes possible right away by sunset. Says the Gemara, the Maimer, do you want to tell me, according to Rabbi Yochanan, they'll avoid this night and if you bring it up middle of the night and you want to do a service at night to do that water is no good. Rabbi said, Rabbi Yochanan said, in the name of Ilfa, if you forgot to put the kiyar into the water, sink it into the water overnight, you could use it for the service of the night. If you're doing it a service at night, but you cannot use it if you want to use it for a service that's performed in the day. But for a night service, it's still good. So Rabbi Yochanan seems to hold that it doesn't become totally invalid at sunset. Actually, it's still good, the water, if you want to do a service at night. You could use the Kiddush Yadayim V'Ragalayim if you did not, put it in, if you did not sink it into the ground. So the Gemara says, you're right. My Eina Maile. What did Rabbi Yochanan then, how do you explain this? If you sink it in over, Rabbi Yochanan seems to say that you should put it in by sunset. My Eina Maile, Nami Dekama, Lavai Desun. That's what Rabbi Yochanan meant, that you should put it in by sunset. If you didn't do it, it invalidates it for the next day. It invalidates it for service that's supposed to be performed during the daytime, but the water is still good, even if you didn't sink it in for a service that's done at night. So that's basically like Rabbi Chia bar Yosef. Rabbi Yochanan is saying what Rabbi Chia bar Yosef said, that there are two periods where the water becomes possible. The water becomes possible for a service at night if you didn't at sunset, and then it becomes possible for every type of service if you don't sink it in, obviously, by Alosa Shachar. So Rabbi Yochanan basically effectively said the same thing Rabbi Chia bar Yosef, and that is the Gemara's question. If that's the case, Hain Rabbi Chia bar Yosef, isn't he saying exactly what Rabbi Chia bar Yosef said? So we go to Amud Beis. Ike benayu, there is a gezerah shikua. Rabbi Yochanan said, Rabbi Yochanan says, Ein maleo is because, not because, not because, and not because he holds like it's possible. What the Gemara is now taking a pivot that Rabbi Yochanan does not hold Rabbi Chia, but he says put it in by sunset, because if you don't put it in by sunset, I'm afraid you're going to forget to put it in by Alois Shacha. So basically, Rabbi Yochanan holds like somebody else. He's going to hold like the second opinion, that really it's only becomes usher by it only becomes usher by a mod hashacha. But Rabbi Yochanan advised put it in by sunset, because if you're going to tell me wait till you don't have to put it in right by sunset, you'll forget to do it by a mod hashacha, and everything will become possible. But really, Rabbi Yochanan aligns himself with Rav Hizda's opinion that it only becomes possible by a mod hashacha. So the Gemara could ask right away the question. But the Gemara asks further questions on Rabbi Yochanan. On Rabbi Yochanan said, Kiddush Yada L'Trumas Hadashin, the Kohen that did the service of Trumas Hadashin, which was done while it was still nighttime. 3 o'clock in the morning, sometimes they did Kiddush Trumas Hadashin. So if the Kohen that washed his hands for Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim, L'mochar Ein Tzorach L'Kaddish, Shekvar Kiddush M'tchilas Avoda. The next day, he doesn't have to be Mekadesh, he doesn't have to repeat it, the Kohen, because he did it at 3 o'clock in the morning. Now, once he did Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim, he brought up the Kiyar, right? The Kohen that did this service at 3 o'clock in the morning. Wait a second, but if it wasn't in the contraption, even under the water at Alois Shacha, then all the water is possible. So how did Rabbi Yochanan not mention that the guy who brought it up at 3 o'clock in the morning to do Trudas Hadashin should lower it back? So the Gemara says like this: Bishlam that this opinion that Rabbi Yochanan said that if you did Kiddush Yadayim by Trumas Hadashin, you don't have to do Kiddush, because that goes according to another opinion of Rabbi Lazar and Rabbi Shimon, who held that there's no such a thing of psulina there's no such a thing of an exposure night, psul, by Mei Kiyar and by Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim. So that's a separate opinion. So you can say that this is a off opinion of Rabbi Yochanan, but he was going according to Rabbi Lazar bar Rabbi Shimon. But we're going according to Rebbe that it becomes pasul. Ela Abaye to Moikim Lo Rebbe. Abaye said this could even be going according to Rebbe, right? So kasha the Rebbe ad the Rebbe. So then we have a question of what Rabbi Yochanan said here. According to if it's possible, here Rabbi Yochanan says it doesn't become possible by Alois, and over there it would seem that Rabbi Yochanan said that it does become possible if it's not underwater by Alois Shacha. So what is it? So the Gemara says, why over there we say the Meshakelate? Rabbi Yochanan said, stick it back under the water, make sure it's by dawn time in the underneath the ground. Over here, the loy Meshakelate, that the Rabbi Yochanan made no mention that the guy who brought it up 3 o'clock in the morning should put it back down. Answers the Gemara, you're right, he didn't talk about it. But really, the guy that used it 3 o'clock in the morning would lift it up, do the Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim, do the Trumas Hadashin. But before he did the Trumas Hadashin, the Mesalek he brought it up, V'hoda Meshakale, and then brought it down. So Yihachi, if we're going to ask a question, L'mochar Eina Makadesh, why did Rabbi Yochanan say that, according to the first page, in the name of Ilfa, that if you didn't do the Shikui Be'erev, right, if you didn't sink it in by nighttime, like by sunset, you could use it for avodas laila, and tomorrow you cannot use it anymore. So why can't you use it for tomorrow if you, in the middle of the night, put it down if you put it down into the water, like say at 10 o'clock at night, why can't you use it anymore? And says the Gemara, what did he mean to say is ain't sarach lakadosh. The guy that did it at the middle of the night, he doesn't have to repeat the Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim. But the kir itself went down. So the Gemara asks a question. Lememra, the matirim michse chaze, hainu de Rav Chizda. So isn't what he's saying exactly what Rav Chizda is saying? That's the question the Gemara is now asking. There's no difference between Rav Yochanan and Rav Chizda. They both say that kir water only becomes possible only if it's exposed at dawn, 4 o'clock in the morning. But it doesn't become possible throughout the night. So what's the difference between Rav Yochanan and Rav Chizda? Answers the Gemara answers, Ika Benaya mitzvah shikua. Is there a mitzvah to put it down, to make sure to put it down by sunset? According to Rav Yochanan, try to put it down sunset because you might forget to do it later. According to Rav Chizda, no, they didn't do it right away by sunset. They could do it even later. We rely on that it's gonna happen. Let's finish up the Gemara in a half a minute with one question. Basically, I'm going to ask you a question. The guy that did Truma Sedeshin at 3 o'clock in the morning, nobody saw him. They didn't hear a sound when he did it. Until they heard him bringing it up, because when you roll this thing up, it makes such a loud noise, so that woke up all the Kahanim. That's how they woke up. So what's the question? My love, don't you see? The Masalikle, he brought it up, right? So he brought it up because when you it must have been in the water. He brings it up, and he wasn't the one that put it into the ground. So it must have been like Rabbi Yochanan said. You have to put it into the ground in the beginning of the night. And what woke up all the other katanim is they brought it up alma mashakale. So if we see from there that it was sunk in the ground, like Rabbi Yochanan said, let's say by sunset. So when the guy did the job 3 o'clock in the morning, he had to make noise by pulling it up. Answers the Gemara, loy, the mashakale. Really, according to Rav Chizda, it was out the whole night. When the guy did the service in the 3 o'clock in the morning, he did Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim, and then he was the one that lowered it into the ground. And that's what woke up all the Kahanim. Says the Gemara, can you hear a sound when somebody lowers the kiyur into the ground? Answers the Gemara, you can hear the wheels turn. With the ropes. So, so when they heard the sound of these ropes bringing it down, they knew it's time to get up. So basically, according to Rav Chizda, not that they put it into the ground by sunset, but actually they left it out on the floor normally till 3 o'clock in the morning. The guy that did the Truma Sedesh at 3 o'clock in the morning, he lowered it into the ground after he did Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim, and that woke up all the Kahanim. Asked the Gemara one last question. V'hava Gvina Cruz, but who woke up the Kahanim? Was this guy over here. There was a guy who screamed out. They didn't have clocks then, so they had this guy with a loud voice, you can see him in the picture, scream out, saying, I see the sun coming up. Everybody get up. So what did they need him for if they heard a guy lower the kiyur into the water that made a lot of noise? And Gemara, that's how they woke up the Kahanim. Beitrei hekei rehavav. They made 2 alarm clocks. The Shama Mahai Asri, the Shama Mahai also. They heard from the lowering of the kiyur into the water, that woke him up. And they also heard from this guy Gvini, who had a loud voice, and that also woke up all the Kahanim. Okay, that ends the daf.